Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the biggest, most persistent global stereotypes out there, the idea that all of India is vegetarian. We are going to completely turn that assumption on its head. We'll be digging into the hard numbers, the fascinating history, and the geographic realities to uncover why that stereotype is really just a tiny fraction of the actual story.
So let's start with the big question. Is India really a vegetarian country? When you think of Indian food on a global scale, your mind probably jumps right to those incredibly rich, plant-based curries and dals, right? But think about it. Is a nation of well over 1 billion people literally all eating the exact same way? Let's take a look at what the latest, most comprehensive data actually tells us.
Prepare to have your mind blown just a little bit. According to major Pew Research data, only about 40% of Indian adults actually describe themselves as strict vegetarians. Now, don't get me wrong, by global standards, 40% is absolutely massive. It makes India home to one of the largest vegetarian populations on the entire planet. But fundamentally, it also means that a whopping 60% of the country does not strictly follow a vegetarian diet.
But there's a really interesting catch to those numbers. When we break it down, there's a middle group here, 41% of the population, who restrict meat partially. Maybe they avoid specific kinds of meat, or, maybe they skip it on certain days of the week for religious reasons. When you combine those partial restrictors with our 40% strict vegetarians, you get a staggering 81% of the country reporting some form of meat restriction. Yet even with that huge number, it still leaves nearly 1/5 of the entire population who are purely, unabashedly non-vegetarian.
Section 1. Roots of the diet. Why are so many Indians vegetarian?
It really comes down to this incredibly complex web of history. First off, you have the Hindu principle of ahimsa, which basically means non-violence or avoiding harm to living beings. Then you have Jainism. Jainism has this outsized cultural impact. A staggering 97% of Jains restrict meat, with traditional practices even avoiding root vegetables just to protect organisms in the soil. No way, right? Add in centuries-old caste traditions tied to ritual purity, and over generations, these mixed religious guidelines simply evolved into everyday family kitchen habits. If your local markets, your festivals, and your grandparents' kitchens don't serve meat, well, vegetarianism naturally becomes the cultural default.
Section 2. The power of milk. Sustaining the vegetarian belt.
So how exactly did a massive agricultural society manage to thrive without meat protein for centuries? It all comes down to lacto-vegetarianism. Historically, cattle were just as vital for plowing fields as they were for producing dairy. This created a downright ingenious food system. Milk, curd, and paneer beautifully coexisted with plant-based eating, making the diet incredibly sustainable and nutritionally complete without ever needing to rely on meat.
And honestly, the modern economic data backs this up perfectly. Recent government expenditure surveys from 2022 and 2023 show that in places like rural Haryana, over 40% of household food spending goes straight to dairy. Rural Rajasthan and Punjab are right behind at around 35%. We aren't just talking about a slight preference for milk with cereal here. This heavy spending on dairy is the literal economic and nutritional engine keeping India's vegetarian belt running.
Section 3. Mapping the food geography. The Great Regional Divide.
Because here's the thing, those national statistics, they actually hide a wild geographic divide. While 71% of Hindus in North India are vegetarian, that number just plummets to 30% down in the south. And in Northeast India, according to Pew Research, it drops all the way down to just 19%. This is absolutely crucial to understand. Religion alone isn't dictating the plate. A Hindu living in North India is eating a drastically different diet than a Hindu living in the south or the northeast.
States like Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, and Gujarat, they form the absolute historical core of India's vegetarian belt. Up here, deep-rooted merchant cultures, strong religious traditions, and that dairy-heavy agriculture we just talked about all blended together. It created one of the most sophisticated vegetarian civilizations on Earth. I mean, historically, Rajasthan has reported having around 75% of its population is completely vegetarian.
Section 4. The non-vegetarian heartlands, coastlines, and forests.
Now shift gears for a second. Travel down to the coasts or up into the northeast, places like Kerala, Bengal, or Assam, and you are stepping into a totally different culinary world. Think about it. If your ancestors lived surrounded by rushing rivers, wetlands, or dense forests, your regional heritage naturally evolved around what was there: fish, seafood, local meats. Eating fermented animal products or fish isn't unusual in these areas at all. It is deeply, deeply woven into their local culture and historical food economy. Section 5. Making sense of the data. The ultimate dietary contrast.
When you strip away the survey labels and just track where the money actually goes, the contrast is literally mind-blowing. Look at this. Kerala spends over 23% of its food budget on meat and fish. Haryana? Barely 2%. Assam, way up in the northeast, spends a flat 20% on eggs, fish, and meat, while Gujarat sits right alongside Haryana at the absolute bottom with just over 2%. We're looking at two completely opposite food economies operating inside the exact same nation.
Section 6. The health misconception. Vegetarian does not equal healthy.
Now, before we wrap up, we've got to tackle a major assumption. There's this global idea that being vegetarian automatically makes you healthy, but the reality on the ground is so much more complex. An Indian vegetarian diet can be incredibly nutritious, rich in pulses, whole grains, and nuts, but actually it can just as easily be totally loaded with refined carbohydrates, heavy sugary sweets, and deep-fried snacks. Simply removing meat doesn't guarantee a healthy plate. It's the overall dietary composition that truly matters no matter which regional culinary tradition you're pulling from.
And this whole thing perfectly highlights why capturing diet in the survey is just so incredibly tricky. As we've seen today, vegetarian isn't a single rigid thing. One person might check the vegetarian box but eat eggs every single morning, making them a lacto-ovo vegetarian. Somebody else might call themselves non-vegetarian but literally only eat chicken once a month. You really have to mix religion, cultural geography, and hard spending data to see the true picture.
Ultimately, the big takeaway from this explainer is that India defies simple one-word labels. It isn't just one dietary monolith. It's a massive, geographically rich map of distinct culinary civilizations. So, the next time you sit down in an Indian restaurant or hear someone try to generalize a billion different diets into one single category, ask yourself, which of the many Indias are you actually tasting? And honestly, what other massive global food myths are just waiting to be debunked?